I am Adrian Armstrong from Omaha, Nebraska. I'm an artist that lives and works in Austin, Texas. I identify as a Black American male. Has anyone ever mistaken my identity or ethnicity? No. Um, yeah, never.
My name is Ashley Hicks. I identify as a black queer woman. I have had my identity and ethnicity mistaken before. It usually pertains to who I'm hanging out with, where I'm, geographically located. A lot of times people mistake me for Afro Latinx or s- multiracial. I grew up in Garland, Texas, which is a suburb outside of Dallas, Texas. And I grew up in a mostly middle class, lower middle class neighborhood. The school I went to was mostly white and affluent. I think my upbringing influenced who I am today by just kind of helping me to understand the scope of my blackness within spaces that were not predominantly black, and how that would be something that I would have to navigate my entire life.
My name is Sequoia Maynor. I'm a poet and a professor. I identify as a Black woman. I've never been mistaken for a different ethnicity or identity. It's interesting because my mother, who is my adopted mom, is a very light skinned Black woman, and I see her get mistaken for everything but Black. And she's a professional, she's a doctor, and people like to assume that she is Middle Eastern, Latina, but she's a very light skinned Black woman. So I haven't gotten it myself, but I've seen it closely. I grew up in Los Angeles. Specifically, I was born in South Central California in 1987. I spent a large part of my childhood in foster care in South Central. I was adopted by a single Black woman when I was around 8 years old. Um, and I moved from South Central to Long Beach. And my mom still lives in Long Beach, California. Just a diverse place when it comes to race and ethnicity and class. So I feel like I grew up with everyone, and I also grew up with a deep sense of Black pride. And that was something that was celebrated in the city that I grew up with. Um, it was also a place where I understood that uh, ethnicity and cultural heritage means a lot and means many different things to people, right? So on my block alone, I grew up with Vietnamese and Cambodian and Filipino and Mexican and Ecuadorian and El Salvadorian folks. And there was a acknowledgement of the differences between those groups and also a celebration of um, like a same beautiful culture that existed in that place. So I feel like Long Beach is very particular when it comes to race and ethnicity. And I've never lived in a place quite like it since. I think it gave me a sort of mindset where I'm able to talk to all kinds of folks and be comfortable in those situations. I think it also kind of perhaps it sort of shielded me from some things that I didn't understand until I moved to other locations in the country, right? So when I moved to North Carolina or when I moved to Texas, those were some of my first experiences with white supremacists. And it was the first time that I realized that they lived sort of everywhere. And I had been shielded from that in like the beautiful universal location that was Long Beach, California.
I identify as a male, biracial, black and white. My ethnicity has been mistaken several times, um, just from individuals not knowing what I am or making assumptions. It's very common for individuals of the Latino community to assume that I am Latino. Experienced that quite a bit in the Bronx. And yeah, I grew up in San Antonio, Texas. San Antonio is a city that would be predominantly Mexican American, white, and growing up in San Antonio as a person of color wasn't an uncommon thing for that city. However, growing up as a black individual in that city did lead to some interesting scenarios, as it's not many black folks in San Antonio, Texas. Growing up in an environment like that has influenced who I am in a lot of ways, but mainly being able to navigate scenarios where you and what you identify as is not the norm, and being able to fluidly navigate different scenarios amongst different races and different expectations of you, something that I learned very quickly in San Antonio.
My name is Fumio Gunro, and I'm a film producer. I identify as a black woman. No one has ever mistaken my ethnicity or my identity. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and a lot of Austin is very white. But where I grew up, my parents had businesses on the east side of Austin. So there are a lot of black people in East Austin at that time. So I was always surrounded by black folk. And now even East Austin is white. And I feel like um, even though I was around black people as a child, growing up as a teenager and in my 20s in Austin, I felt kind of invisible and isolated because you walk into Whole Foods or HEB and you just see white people everywhere and you're just like, what in the world? We're like, what the heck? There ain't no black people. And then it made me jealous too. I'm jealous sometimes of white people because they can just go outside and see white people everywhere. And I'm like, how beautiful would that be just to step outside and just see white people? And then they can, like, if they're on Tinder or if they're on Match.com. No, scratch that. Actually, if they just want to go on a date in Austin, there's so many white people to choose from, and it's like 10 black people to choose from. So for my experience, so yeah, that makes me very mad. Rewind, cut, switch it around. Okay. When did I hear? Okay, I heard about the paper bag test a long time ago, but I don't remember when. And I was surprised when I heard it. I think my mom told me about it.
I learned about the paper bag test. I think my earliest memory of it was probably middle school, um, and it was through a joke because my sister and a lot of my family are light skinned, so it was a joke through that, talking about them versus me, pretty much.
I learned about the paper bag test probably around late middle school, early high school through different conversations with my mother about racism and the history of racism in America.
Ooh, the paper bag test very early on. So I love my adopted mother for this, who I call mom. She was very focused and determined to put Black authored sources in my hands, Black art, Black history. Uh, and there were really no secrets in our household. So it means that I learned about this early on. I would say sometime in elementary, maybe middle school.
I learned about the paper bag test. I learned about the paper bag test from my mother. My mother grew up in Selma, Alabama. Her father was white, her mother was black, and she had experienced quite a bit of, I guess, what is the word? Um, she had experienced quite a bit of, I guess, colorism growing up, and being from the South, and having had gone to a HBCU, she kind of let me understand just the different ways that people were and were not validated by the color of their skin. Connected to like sororities and, learning about like AKAs and deltas and that kind of, I guess, specific kind of colorism that happens within Black communities.